We have determined that there is reasonable cause to believe that the Albuquerque Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of use of excessive force, including the use of unreasonable, deadly force.
Why don't you go ahead?
It's the lady at 46 South Rose. 46 South Rose.
Station 1 call, retone that police. 10-4. Captain 4 will be going to that location also. 1 versus 1-9, is that correct?
Sorry, what last four?
Right, 1-8-5, 4 miles, and I'll retone that.
As you all know, last year the Department of Justice, assisted by the U.S. Attorney's Office here in New Mexico, started a preliminary review of the Albuquerque Police Department to determine if a full investigation into their policies and practices on use of force is necessary. After careful consideration of the information gathered during our review, we have concluded that a full civil rights investigation is warranted to determine whether APD engages in a pattern or practice of violations of the Constitution or federal law. In particular, the investigation will focus on use of force by APD, including but not limited to the use of deadly force. Our investigation into APD...
Get on the ground! Get on the ground now! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Don't make noise! Put up! Move it!
My name's Kenneth Ellis. My son was the Iraq war veteran that shot and killed by APD in January of 2010. You know, there was a little bit of a disturbance here, and we took over City Council on Monday night, and to prove a point, we the people have the power, and we relinquish that power to our servants and to our elected officials, and they abuse that power. And we made a point on Monday night that the people are in charge, and it's going to take the people of this community to fix the problem that we have here.
So when my son was shot and killed by the police in January of 2010, so I did this campaign process and petition drive, and in doing so I literally talked to tens of thousands of people, and it became very clear to me that I needed to get a higher power in here to to see this police department and to fix a problem that was very obvious to me after speaking to thousands of people that have been victimized by this police department. And I
basically discovered the problem was bigger than you thought.
I discovered that it wasn't just a bad officer or a bad shooter or, you know, a few bad apples. I discovered that it was not only the police department, but it was the system that is supposed to monitor the police department, the internal affairs, the police certification review board, the police oversight commission, the district attorney, the attorney general. The whole system and process was flawed, and there was no accountability for misconduct within the police department. They were impunitive to the laws that they were sworn to uphold. So, that was very disturbing to me, and to find out that the way they'd been violating people's rights. I knew early on the way this police department was assaulting people and literally committing crimes in the name of the law. And
this is what you were hearing from people on the street?
This is absolutely how they were being targeted because of because of their skin color or because of their ethnicity. So I learned early on that this police department was policing for profit. After doing a petition drive for a grand jury, that kind of fizzled out. I didn't get a lot of support early on. It was just a few of us, and it became obvious that we needed to get DOJ in here and get some federal intervention into this police department and this administration and this system that was flawed and was giving the public a false perception of accountability within the police department that simply was not there. They were justifying these shootings. Oh, the grand jury had justified the shooting, so that makes it okay. Well, the information the grand jury was given was a fabricated story on what happened, and it was just a complete whitewashing and cover-up to exonerate the officer of any wrongdoing, even when he shot someone in the back, even when he murdered somebody. So we shifted our energy. We just a few of the family members, just a handful of us early on, shifted our energy from a petition for a grand jury to we did a petition drive to get DOJ here to investigate the police department. A lot of people stepped up with a lot of evidence and documents and proving that there was a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing, and we proved that to DOJ. So they had no choice but to step in here and intervene because they had a rogue regime police department. So the MLK Martin Luther King group in Jewel Hall, we formed a coalition of families and different organizations. NAMI, it's National Alliance for Mental Health, and just a lot of different organizations. We all came together in a coalition to campaign to get DOJ here, and we were successful in doing so. It took a lot of legwork, a lot of on the streets and
gathering statistics, gathering information.
Handing out flyers and taking. I actually, for better part of a year, drove around in this city with big signs all over my truck that said report police misconduct, and I purchased a couple of phones, one in Spanish and one in English, and literally passed out tens of thousands of flyers asking people to report police misconduct, and gathered a lot of information.
Directly to the Department of Justice.
Right.
Yeah.
Early on, the information that I was asking for, I just bought my own phone, bought two phones, one for Spanish, and then a lady friend of mine, Miss Fuentes, she, my godmother, she fielded the calls that were in Hispanic. I passed out 10,000 flyers in Spanish and 20,000 in English, and we fielded calls ourselves. And after we started getting this information and stuff, then we compiled this information and handed it over to DOJ, and they decided, well, yeah, this is something that needs to be investigated. So they came in, and we continued to compile information and give and feed DOJ with documentation of police misconduct and unconstitutional use of force and use of deadly force. And we've got
Now, you went to the city administration trying to get the Department of Justice in here. You went to the city council and you went to the mayor.
Yeah.
And they...
I spoke to anyone that would listen, and the problem was everything I was saying to this administration and to these counselors and to the Police Oversight Commission and all these committees and councils and all these, they would listen, but they weren't hearing me, and so, or any of the other family members. But so it took DOJ to come out with this report and to spell it out, and then the James Boyd shooting, killing, murder video that was released to the world was the catalyst that really got people upset. And well, since the reports came out, they've...
That was what, in April of this year?
Yeah, it was somewhere around there. But this year, the police department has actually shot 6 other individuals, so they're right on, right on pace with the killings that they've done all along. So they're continuing on with their situation normal. They're still killing people out there, so it's very disheartening. And I said all along, all DOJ or anybody needs to do is make an example out of one of these police officers that have murdered someone and put him in jail, and the rest of the police officers will get the message that this is not, you're not going to be able to get away with breaking the laws that you're sworn to uphold. So I'm still waiting for that indictment. I'm waiting for the indictments on the murderers of James Boyd and the murderers of my son and the murderers of some of these other young men and women that have been killed by the police department. They shot a 19-year-old young lady a few months back. Shot her 3 times, and the trajectory of the bullets came from above her down in through her, so as if she was almost laying down practically when he shot her. So it's very disturbing, the details of some of these shootings, and so we need to we just need to get some indictments and get some justice here, so that we can go on with our lives. There's a lot of people that are very upset with what's happened here in this city, and they're to this day are still planning on civil unrest until we get justice.
My name is Steve Torres. This is my wife Renetta, and we are parents of 3 sons, Matthew, Daniel, and Christopher. And Christopher, of course, unfortunately was the one who was shot and killed April 12th, 3 years ago.
Christopher was a delightful child. He was very talkative. He was very engaged. He started playing soccer at a very early age. He had 2 older brothers, and they played with him all the time.
So he was the youngest.
So he was the youngest, and they did not give him any breaks because he was the youngest. I remember walking out into the front yard one day, and they'd set up goals on both ends of the front yard, and Christopher's actually in the box, and he's 3. And I said to Matthew and Daniel, Daniel, who would have been 5 years older than Christopher, and Matthew, who was actually 10 years older than Christopher, I said, what are you guys doing? Why do you have him in the box? Well, he wants to play, Mom, and if he's going to play with us, he's going to play. Well, what that did for Christopher, it made him an excellent soccer player. He played up his entire career because he had 2 older brothers that he had to keep up with, and he did an admirable job of it. He was very engaged. He was just this, had a great sense of humor and this infectious laugh. Even if you didn't know what Christopher was laughing about, it brought a smile to your face. And as he grew older, I don't think that changed very much. He was very family oriented. Family was very important to Christopher from the time he was a little guy. And he especially had a great relationship with children and older people. And I think that if the illness took anything away from him, it was his sense of humor wasn't quite as present anymore. It would occasionally come back, and you'd see those, hints of that jovial, joke-playing young man. But family, and especially once, he was diagnosed, family was his universe. Everything rotated around family for Christopher. But in spite of all of that, in spite of all of the side effects of the medication, Christopher remained optimistic about life. One of the funny stories that Stephen likes to tell is, and it was probably in a good 6 months before his death, at one point, we were all in the kitchen, Christopher was talking, and the conversation came up about somebody that we knew that had diabetes. And Christopher felt that he was so much more fortunate because he didn't suffer from diabetes. So, I think he put things into a context that made life a little bit more positive. And certainly I think he was optimistic. You asked us earlier, what he was like as a child, what did he want to do when he grew up. And interestingly enough, from the earliest time that I can remember, certainly before he was 5, Christopher always talked about being an attorney. That's what he wanted to do.
Yes, very interesting.
And of course, our oldest son is an attorney, and he never spoke about being an attorney. It was Christopher who always talked about being one, and I certainly think he probably would have made a pretty good one. He could argue his way out of just about everything. Christopher, I guess if I had to describe him in one word, it would be gentle.
I'm Mike Gomez, father of Alan Gomez, who was shot May 10th, 2011. His anniversary's coming up. 3 years and 2 days. So, it's been hard. As a family.
Oh, Alan was a little spark plug, He was always getting into things, and I remember he used to hide. We used to go to the store to go like clothes shopping for him for his school. And we'd be I'll never forget this, we'd be in Penny's or Sears or something. And next thing you know, he'd just disappear. So we'd look all over for him and everything. That's when he was about, 4 or 5 years old. And, he'd come out laughing from inside of the clothes racks. He'd go into the middle of the clothes racks where you couldn't see him, because he used to be round back then.
Right.
And you didn't know where he was at, So he used to be a little prankster like that. And he was fearless, because he had an older sister and older brother. I'll never forget, he also never, when he first rode a bike, he never had a trike. He went right from a little baby push thing to a two-wheeler without training wheels.
No training
wheels.
Wow.
And there was no such thing as elbow guards and helmets and stuff back then. So he seen all the other kids riding bikes, the older kids, so he hopped on one and tried it until he could keep on going with it, And so another thing I remember, he never had training wheels either when he was a kid, because he always wanted to be like the bigger kids, And you know, he was quite a little spirit. You know, he was always fearless too. He was fearless little kid.
And he was really starting to make his mark in his, I mean, he was an athlete.
Yeah, oh yeah, he was, well, for one thing, as soon as he graduated, he started as a sheet metal worker apprentice. So, you know, all he had to be for a sheet metal worker apprentice was to be 18 and have a high school diploma. Well, he turned 18, and then he got his high school diploma, and a week later, I got him a job as a sheet metal worker. And he was working on roofs, on air conditioners, on everything, you know, outside construction, you know. And he handled that real well. And because of that, him working pretty steady for a couple of years, he decided he didn't want to pay rent anymore. I remember he said, Dad, you know, rent, you know, I just throw money away, you know. You know, why should I pay rent? And I said, well, go see if you can buy a house. And sure enough, he did. He went, and I didn't even help him. I just gave him a little suggestion, and he goes out and finds a real estate agent and found out that he qualified for it, and he bought a house at 19.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was great, you know, but, you know, I was real proud of him, but it ended up not being so good. It was the opposite of what I thought. Because, you know, he had some, substance abuse problems, you know, when he was in his teens. And he went to rehab when he was 17 and he kicked it, you know, he kicked everything. Then he graduated from high school, and then he got a job. He had a job, a girlfriend, a car, you know. Then when he got the house, you know, like I was telling you, I thought it was the best thing. But it ended up being the worst thing. Because all of a sudden, here's a 19-year-old kid. He's got obligations now. He's got to, you know, pay a house payment. He's got to pay taxes. He's got to pay utilities. And it ate him up.
So lots of things on.
A lot of stuff. But the main thing was, to do this, he had to get roommates. So when he got the roommates, well, they were, you know, kids, 18, 19 years old, and they were wanting to drink and party. And alcohol was the reason why Alan started having his problems. So he started doing alcohol again, you know, a little bit of time. Next thing you know, the kids were giving him a little bit of prescription pills, you know. Mm-hmm. Next thing you know, he couldn't pay for the prescription pills. They were too expensive, so he get the stuff off the street. And there you go, you know. He was back at it again. And that's where I started learning about police brutality and all the stuff that's been going around here. Because I remember you were asking, you know, was I involved before all this stuff happened? No. I was just a construction worker working on job sites, and I happened to get this new job in the construction office. And I got the job in October, and my son was killed in May, so I was still learning that job. So,
but you understand what the average person is going through until something like this hits them personally.
Oh yeah, it just, you know, from when your heart's ripped out of your chest, you know, you still got to keep your mind going, you know. And then I didn't know if I was hurt or pissed off or both, and probably both. So that's when, you know, I heard about this protest, and I said, I'm going to join this thing. I don't even know what it's all about, but I'm going to join it. I'm going to put some signs together, and I still have those signs today. I still carry them. The signs have been in the news all over the country. These signs I got with my kid's picture on it. So anyway, I was out there with a sign, and all of a sudden this guy in this little truck drives up next to me. You know, I'm out there in the middle of the street, you know, saying car wash, you know, come on in. We're getting a line of cars, you know, coming in. And anyway, this guy comes up, and he gets out, he's got this cowboy hat on, you know. And he says, you know what, he says, did your son get killed by APD? And I go, yeah, he sure did, just a few days ago. And he says, well, you know, my son got killed a year ago by APD. And that's where I met Ken Ellis. And we've been together ever since.
I wanted to follow up on one thing you just said about not caring, not trying to make the public more aware, because unfortunately I think I speak for both of us, we were both just like that public. we were somewhat aware of what had been going on a little bit here in Albuquerque with the Ellison death and the Lopez death. But of course, we only heard one side of the story. We'd only heard the police side of the story. And when you listen to the police side of the story, well, you think, well, it was unfortunate, but they probably did the only thing they could do. And of course, and when it didn't happen in our backyard, we really felt kind of insulated and protected, and felt sorry for them. But once it does happen in your backyard, and once it hits you in the gut, it really changes things.
I think one of the big pieces for us as a family was your statement was just absolutely spot on, right on the mark, in terms of people caring. Perhaps it's raising awareness, because again, what we know is what the media feeds us. So if the local newspaper, which is the only one of general circulation, prints a paper, an article on something that's occurred in the city, well, what we know now is they definitely slant the information. Likewise with the media. For the most part, for the past 3 years, the media has not done a very good job of getting a balance to the story on every one of these shootings, not just Christopher's, so that the public is left to consume what facts they're given. And if you don't know the rest of the story, on the face of it, it appears, because they always talk about they had a lengthy criminal history. You hear that on every shooting. Even if it isn't factual, those are the first words out of the city administration, APD, lengthy criminal history.
But we decided, no, we're going to try and do what we can to try and prevent this from happening to anybody else's family. And I think that's what we've been trying to do for the last 3 years. I've told the story to our good friend Mike Gomez, whose son was killed a month after Christopher, because for that first month we were just numb and didn't do anything. And I still feel a little guilty that we didn't do anything, because had we done something a little sooner, I don't know, maybe we might have been able to do something to prevent Mike and his family from having to go through what we did.
And well, I do believe that I have to say that I think it was Mike Gomez that brought us out from our comatose state. Mike was very quick to mobilize after his son Alan was killed. He brought the families together in a very quick, decisive way. And it was that family that we formed with the rest of these families that lost their loved ones that I think gave us strength. Up to that point, there had been people that had been in the battle, if you will, trying to get the city administration to pay attention. But unfortunately for them, it was typically, one family member, 2 family members approaching city council at city council meetings, trying to get their voices heard, and actually trying to get the city council to listen. But once we were in bigger numbers and we became better organized, one of the things that we did too was go back and review the history of APD. We went back decades.
When I left him, because I had to go to a conference for my job, and I really didn't want to go. That was the hardest thing. I didn't want to go, and it was when I was at the airport leaving. The plane was late by 2 hours. It was like something was telling me not to go.
That premonition.
Yeah, and I kept saying, man, I better stay here. But then, the old 2 things on your shoulder, One saying, screw it, just go, who cares about your job? And the other one says, well, you know what, you just got this job, this is mandatory, you got to go to keep your job, so I thought, well, the best place to be was his brother, so he's not alone. So I told Alan to go to his brother's house, and when I landed in my destination where the conference was at, he was going to his brother's house. So I thought it was okay, Well, I guess he got there, they were watching TV, he took a shower, they ate. That was like at 10 o'clock in the evening on May the 9th. And then, I guess in between times there, he went in the bathroom, I guess he started doing some drugs. Well, this new drug he had started making him hallucinate. And he started thinking, that there was people out there to get him. It was like he was foreseeing his own death.
Right.
He kept saying, you know, the cops are coming, you know, and you know, get down, you know. So when his brother called for help, you know, it was to get help for him, for Alan.
And when you say call, you mean call 911?
He called 911, you know. And I was so tired when I left, because I stayed up the night before with Alan, you know. And I was so tired that, you know, I didn't bother to call that night, you know. And I never thought to tell Eric, you know, no matter what, don't you call the cops.
Right.
You know, no matter what. Well, I didn't tell him that. And Eric, his brother, he thought he was doing the right thing, you know. I mean, it's the only thing he you know, who would have imagined that something like that would have happened? Well, when he has his girlfriend call, the 911 dispatcher just turns everything into a super, you know, situation, you know. She's telling the 911 lady that, you know, his brother's acting weird, you know, he won't let us move, you know, because he was afraid that someone was going to get them, you know, so he told him, stay down, you know. And anyway, when the dispatch tells the cops, all of a sudden it turns into a hostage situation. So they think it's a hostage situation.
Albuquerque 911, operator 4121. What is the address to this emergency?
Can you please come to 2813 Madison Street?
What for?
Someone's acting real crazy. My boyfriend's brother. He's in our house and he's acting real crazy. He's outside and he has a gun. And he won't let us move. Can you please?
Is he intoxicated or what's going on?
I don't know what's wrong. Nothing. He's going crazy.
Is this a house or an apartment?
A house.
And he's in the front yard?
Yes, hurry. Please hurry.
What's his name? What's his name?
Colin.
Colin what?
Gomez.
How old is Colin? How old is Colin?
Alan.
How old is he?
How old is he? 22.
How tall? I need a description of him so they know who they're looking for. How tall is he?
He's staying in the house, but he's out in and out. He won't let us move.
What's he wearing?
And there's his brother and his brother's
His brother
girlfriend.
and his girlfriend and him. You know, they were always together, you know. Wasn't anything new. So, anyway, I guess, and all this time, and this was like after midnight. So I was already in Vegas asleep, you know, I was so tired. And anyway, by 3, 4 in the morning, he was dead. You know, because this cop that shouldn't have been on the scene came from all the way across town, I heard. This cop was Sean Wallace. He was going home at the end of his shift. He was over, you know, on the west side of town. And he hears the call. He decides he's going to go and be the hero. So he goes all the way across town, like 15 miles, over to where it happened was on Madison Street, which is on the northeast, the outskirts of the Northeast Heights in Albuquerque. And he shows up there, and because he's canine, you know, he thought he could take over the whole scene. He didn't talk to a commander. He didn't get any authority to do so. He just says, "Here I am," and gets his gun, takes another officer with him, and they go behind the car from across the street. The other cops were there for like an hour watching him just go back and forth in the house, smoking a cigarette, talking to himself outside. You know, they were just watching him. So they were waiting for the crisis. They had called the crisis intervention team. They were waiting for them to come. Well, instead of the crisis intervention team comes, Sean Wallace comes and decides he's it. He's the jury. He's the executioner. He's everything. And he gets behind the car. Alan walks into the house like he had before, and he shoots him. He shoots him through a screen door. An iron screen door was there.
Through the screen door.
Alan was closing the screen door to stay inside the house.
Right.
Well, Wallace didn't let him.
Now,
There was a hole in the screen door.
Mhm.
They took it for evidence. So he shot through the screen door. It was one of those metal iron doors where all you could see is a silhouette.
Right.
And all of a sudden, he's seen everything. Oh, he had a gun. He was, he moved in a violent movement towards the hostages, he called them, anyway. It was all
And there was one other thing that they claimed, the officer claimed, seeing him through the screen door, that he had something in his hand. And now I understand there's even a dispute whether there was anything in his hand, but if anything, what the police have stated officially is what they believe is he had a plastic spoon in his hand.
Oh, that's the first thing they could come up with.
Right.
When he was lying dead on the floor, with nothing in his hand, they looked around and said, "Oh, look, there's a spoon. We're gonna go ahead and put that in his hand."
Well, I'll go first because I think I heard first. I was at work and my neighbor from across the street called me, and I didn't take the call, but she left a message on my voicemail. And she said, there's something happening here at your house. There's police officers here up and down the street with rifles pointed at your house. And so I rushed. I knew that Christopher was probably at home, or probably had been at home. And so I rushed home as soon as I could. And as I drove up to our block, I mean, there's just this massive police presence. Both ends of the street are blocked off with at least 5-6 police cars at each end. There's must have been at least 40-50 police officers just milling around. I could see SWAT officers with their body armor and high-powered weapons, and you're wondering what the heck is going on here. And then, as I start to look around more and more, I mean, the whole situation just becomes more surreal. They've got their little armored personnel carrier parked down the street. Looks like a mini tank.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were 3 or 4 officers who were playing with the little bomb robot in the street. They've got this little robot going up and down the street, and they're just playing with it like you play with a little remote car. And then the police mobile command center is parked down at the next block.
The bomb squad.
The bomb squad was out here, and you're just wondering what in the world is going on here. And of course, I try to find out what's going on. I start asking questions, and they're just so evasive. They're so evasive. They don't want to tell you anything. And of course, I was concerned about Christopher, and they knew. They knew from the minute we got here. They knew, but
Stephen, he'd been dead already.
yes, but they wouldn't tell us. They were so evasive, and because I kept trying to find out, well, what's going on? Where's my son? Is my son okay?
What time did you get here?
About 3 o'clock, between 3 and 3:30.
And he was killed at 2:10.
Yeah, he'd been dead for close to an hour already. Well, the officers I spoke with finally directed me to the commander on the scene, or the officer in charge, and I spoke with him at length, and he wouldn't give me any direct answers either. Just, this is an ongoing criminal investigation. We think there may be somebody in the house with weapons. We're police safety. And I kept, and I knew they were not being honest with me, and I kept trying to tell them, no, it can't be. There's nobody in the house. I offered to come and open the house up and let them in. I said, I'll go let you in. There's nobody there. And of course, the more I offered to help, the more they declined, and it became more and more frustrating. Finally, I got on the phone because, as I said, a close personal friend of ours was a police officer at the time, and I called him up. I called him and I said, what's going on here? Can you try and get some answers for us? And he was the one who was finally able to tell me, well, there was an ambulance that left the scene, and there was one person that was transported from the scene.
This is at 5 o'clock.
I don't remember what time. So of course I call all the local hospitals to see if anybody's been admitted to their emergency rooms. And nobody had anybody that had come in. And so at that point I started to suspect the worst. But of course the officers still wouldn't admit anything to us. And then, and I'll let Renetta take over at this point, because then, the other thing that was here was all of the mobile news vans were here.
All of them.
But they were starting to leave, and as if the story was over. And
or clearly that they had gotten more of the information than you'd been given so far.
Yeah, and I'll let Renetta take over at this point, because that's exactly, they already knew what had happened, and the police still wouldn't tell us.
And if I can just ask one question before, to clarify, the whole incident started simply because someone had come to serve a warrant. Am I correct? Is that what the...
An arrest warrant.
An arrest warrant was, and that was just to serve an arrest warrant. And it wound up with that, what you described, this military-style operation taking over your whole block.
One person was killed Tuesday afternoon in an officer-involved shooting in northwest Albuquerque. The shooting occurred after Albuquerque Police detectives went to a home in the 7600 block of Sunrose Northwest at about 2 p.m. to serve an arrest warrant. Police say there was a confrontation and an officer fired shots, hitting one person who died at the scene. The officer was not injured. Police continued to interview possible witnesses and gather evidence Tuesday afternoon. Details about the arrest warrant were not immediately known.
But you know what we know later, and this is something that I covered in the trial as well, you had all of these officers on scene. It looked like some major crime had gone down on our street. Neighbors were blocked from coming back to their homes for several hours, and those that were in their homes when this went down, APD said, stay away from the windows, don't look out the windows. That evening, I guess one of the things that they were told Stephen at 5:30 was they were in the process of getting a search warrant. They were going to come into our home. And this is really key. They're coming into our home because they believe there's somebody else in the house. This is what they told Stephen. And they wouldn't have the warrant probably for another hour or so. Stephen said to them on numerous occasions, 3-4 times, I will open the door, I will let you in. Oh no, you can't do that. I'll give you the code to the garage so you can go in through the garage. They would not take any of that. They said, we can't do that. So what they did was, they rammed the front door. They rammed
the front door.
Rammed it in.
I mean, here you are offering, of course, a warrant is there if they need it. But if you're opening your home to them and saying you have free access, they don't need a warrant.
No. And when you look at the warrant that was actually signed by the judge, 2 points to the warrant. They wanted first to identify the homeowner.
But you just already identified yourself.
And second, they had dropped papers inside the home and they wanted to retrieve them.
The police had dropped papers inside. See, the first one, they wanted to identify. You don't need a warrant to identify the owner of a home. In fact, usually when you get a warrant, you first had to find out who the owner of the house was.
Well, it was also bogus.
Well, I think that they had moved into covering their backside mode.
Yeah. And they weren't letting you get access to the site at all, so you couldn't see what they were doing. Now, you say they dropped papers inside the home. Did you ever find out what that meant?
No. Why are you getting
it wasn't true.
Why are you getting a warrant to come into our home?
To get the papers you've apparently put there.
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes no sense to me. I've never heard of such a thing.
None of it made any sense.
And kind of just to back up a little bit, right on the heels of that officer telling us that Christopher was gone, I get a call on my cell phone from a friend within 5 minutes. and he's hysterical. He has just seen Christopher's picture on the news, the local television station. So they had time. When they left, they went to prep the story. So APD gave them the information before they gave us the information.
Right.
You think there's just something really wrong with this picture. And then as the evening wears on and they get the warrant, it becomes even more bizarre. The neighbors are telling us that the SWAT team is walking the perimeter of our house with one of those loudspeakers, calling out Christopher's name. Christopher Torres, come out of the house. Christopher Torres, come out of the house.
This is after they've shot him.
He's been...
After they've shot him and removed him.
Well, actually, they removed him somewhere around 3-ish, is what our neighbors are telling us. So, you know, he was removed even when they're refusing to give Stephen any information. His body's gone. So when our friend tells us, well, you know, somebody's been transported to the hospital, well, yeah, he was transported to UNM, to the morgue.
So he was dead on the scene.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know, just to...
And just to follow up on how bogus the whole situation was, one of the vehicles that was here, at least one of the vehicles that was here, was a canine unit. And if they thought somebody was in the house, if they honestly thought somebody was in the house, all they had to do was send in the dog, and in 2 minutes the dog would have been able to come back and let them know there's nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
But no. They smashed down the door.
This door.
This door.
The front door.
They ransacked.
They ransacked the house. They ransacked the house. The closets.
Drawers.
Oh, they were just having a field day.
All in the context of going to serve an arrest warrant.
On somebody that wasn't even here anymore.
Now,
and they knew it.
from what you were able to find out, as you gathered all the information, what happened that day? As far as you have been able to get the documents, and you said that you have had some litigation on the matter, and so how much have you been able to put together as to how this event, this tragic event, transpired?
These two undercover detectives.
Oh, so they were undercover.
Undercover.
And in
plain clothes.
Have you seen how they were dressed? Have you seen pictures
No,
of how
I
they
haven't.
were dressed?
No.
Anyway.
Well, but it's pertinent. You should describe how they were dressed.
They look like thugs. There's no better way to put it. They had on sloppy, oversized T-shirts, jeans.
So they're not coming in suit and tie,
No.
or in clearly identifiable officer uniform.
They were not in uniform. They were not in uniform. And it's still, we still haven't even been able to determine whether they had a badge, whether around their neck, or we don't know. We'll never know. Anyway, what we do know is that they drove up, they parked down the street a little ways, they walked up to the house, came to the front door, rang the bell, and nobody answered. And as they were getting ready to leave, they heard some sounds coming from the backyard. So one of the officers walks around to the side of the house and is able to see or hear Christopher in the backyard. So
With the dog.
Christopher was in the backyard with our dog, with our little dog.
And if he'd been out there when they rang the bell, he may not have heard it.
He almost certainly didn't hear it. Anyway, the officer sees Christopher and confronts Christopher and tells him, we're here to arrest you. And initially Christopher is compliant. I mean, the testimony of the officers is that apparently he had a broomstick. I don't know what he was doing with a broomstick. I don't know if he was cleaning up the backyard but apparently he
But
had...
not unreasonable to be in your backyard with a broom.
Christopher had a broomstick of some sort in his hand. When the officers first approached him, he put the stick down and Christopher backed up. And the officers, one of the officers jumps the fence. I don't know if the officer thought Christopher was backing up to try and escape or get away, but one of the officers jumps the fence and rushes Christopher and tackles him. The other officer, who may not have been as athletic or whatever, for some reason, he can't jump the fence, so he just pulls the fence down. Just pulls the fence down and rushes in to help his partner. So the two of them now are on top of Christopher, just pummeling him. And at this point, our neighbor, just in our backyard neighbor, just fortunately for us, or at that time happened to have she let her little dog out of the house because the little dog had to go to the backyard to do some business, and so she heard something going on here in the backyard, and she hears Christopher hollering and telling the officers, you know, what are you doing? This is my house. What are you doing? And so she comes up to the fence to see what's going on.
And she peers over the fence.
And she looks over the fence and she sees these two officers, both of them on Christopher's back, just beating him, pummeling him. And
he's on all fours.
He's face down on all fours. And the officers apparently are trying to grab his hands to pull him behind his back so that they can handcuff him. And then at one point she hears one of the officers, she sees one of the officers remove his sidearm and calmly announce to Christopher, I'm going to shoot you. And so she at that point turns around and rushes into her house to call the police.
Call 911.
To call 911 because she's thinking that Christopher is being mugged by a couple of thugs. And so she rushes into the house, and I don't remember if after she gets to the house or right before she gets to the house, she hears the first two gunshots, and then shortly thereafter a final gunshot. She does call 911, and the dispatcher assures her that no, those are not robbers, they are police officers. Just stay.
And they have the situation under control. Yeah. Stay in the house.
Stay in your house.
But she ran up to their top bedroom to look out from that window to see what else continued to happen.
Mm-hmm. And she saw that.
Fortunately, that way you have an eyewitness. Yes.
She saw that they had shot Christopher and they were standing over him and not making any attempt to render any assistance. And then a few minutes later, the paramedics show up. More police officers start arriving. The paramedics load Christopher up on the gurney and take him away.
But he was already.
And then more and more officers just start arriving.
So it was 3 shots to the abdomen area, or
three shots to his back. He was
in the back.
At point blank range.
Point blank range in the back.
With one officer sitting
on top of him. Right. So they've got him pinned down. He's not moving anywhere. He's not armed.
Well, hold on.
Oh.
They claim he had a knife.
Yeah.
Apparently, one of the officers may have dropped his handcuffs, and I'm trying to give the officers the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. Maybe they see the handcuffs partly under Christopher, and so one officer apparently tells the other officer, he's got a knife. Christopher didn't have a knife. He didn't have any weapon of any sort. And then supposedly there was a struggle for the officer's gun, and the other officer, apparently he says that he felt his partner's life was in danger, and so he pulls his sidearm and presses it to Christopher's back and fires 3 times.
Well, but Stephen, you're confusing it, because it was the guy on top of him that shoots him.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how because it was very confusing, not because I don't think the way he described it, it's just confusing the way it goes down. Because I don't understand how the person who's in control of the subject, has him pinned down to the ground, is fearful of his partner standing a few feet away.
No, they were both on top of him.
Oh, they were both on top.
They were
so you have 2 people on top of him.
And one of them is pummeling him. One of them is actually beating him quite extensively about the face. And Christopher's ribs were broken. I mean, in a very short amount of time, they were just atrocious. And the guy who claims that Christopher went for his gun was not the guy on top of him, but the guy who's beating him about the head. And you know, Christopher's fingerprints were not on the gun. His DNA was, but this guy's beating him like crazy, and so he's got Christopher's blood on his hand. And the gun was in pristine condition. So they tried to make an argument that there was a scuffle for the gun. Well, there were no scratches on the gun, and it's concrete out there. So
concrete and gravel.
Had there been any scuffle for
Plus,
the gun?
this was a gun that was still secured. You know, not a gun that had sort of been out and then dropped to the ground, and now there was let's go for it. This was.
That's what the officers claim.
But that's their story.
That's their story.
And they've changed their story, what, 4 times now? They've changed it 4 times. But I think, fortunately for Christopher, there was that young lady who did...
Eyewitness.
Because otherwise... But then, you know, there also was the physical evidence. I think that the injuries to his body... I mean,
broken ribs.
His body told a story that they just couldn't get around.
That's a massive beating. And all this in 2 minutes. I mean, that's an assault. I mean, to complete all of that in 2 minutes, you've intended to go in there and assault and capture. That's not something that just all of a sudden, because I've seen your backyard, and it's compact, but most importantly, your border with your neighbors are all these steep rise, you know, areas of gravel and planting that you've done. How in the world could anybody think that, you know, someone's about to flee from, you know, when you're standing at the fence and they're in this confined location? That just doesn't make any sense either.
None of it makes sense.
None of it makes sense.
None of it makes any sense.
Well, I really appreciate, I know how hard it is to have to just rethink and relive all those details. It's just, it gets to me just listening to it.
At all times, officers may use reasonable force when they encounter danger, but they do not have an unqualified right to shoot, taser, punch, or use other force against an individual who is not actively resisting or posing a significant threat.
We really need to weed out some of these officers that have this kill mentality. We need to get some of these officers decertified and take this license to kill and this gun away from them.